StudySavvy. In today's reading podcast, we will be studying Class 12 Biology Ecosystem NCERT line by line. So take a moment to relax, focus your attention, and let's begin this calm and clear reading of ecosystem. An ecosystem can be visualized as a functional unit of nature where living organisms interact among themselves and also with the surrounding physical environment. Ecosystem varies greatly in size from small pond to large forest or a sea. Many ecologists regard the entire biosphere as a global ecosystem as a composite of all local systems on Earth. Since the system is too much big and complex to be studied at one time, it is convenient to divide it into two basic categories, namely terrestrial and aquatic. Forest, grassland, and desert are some examples of terrestrial ecosystem. Pond, lake, wetland, river, and estuaries are some examples of aquatic ecosystem. Crop fields and an aquarium may also be considered as a man-made ecosystem. We will first look at the structure of the ecosystem in order to appreciate the input and productivity, transfer, energy, food chain, web, nutrient cycling, and the output, degradation, and energy loss. We will also look at the relationships, cycle chains, webs that are created as a result of these energy flows within the system and their interrelationship. Ecosystem structure and function. In earlier classes, you have looked at various components of the environment, abiotic and biotic. You studied how individual biotic and abiotic factors affected each other and the surrounding. Let us look at these components in a more integrated manner and see how the flow of energy takes place within these components of ecosystem. Interaction of biotic and abiotic components result in physical structure that is characteristic for each type of ecosystem. Identification and enumeration of plant and animal species of an ecosystem gives its species composition. Vertical distribution of different species occupying different levels is called stratification. For example, trees occupy the top vertical strata, or a layer of forest, shrubs the second, and herbs and grasses occupy the bottom layers. The components of the ecosystem are seen to function as a unit when you consider the following aspects: productivity, decomposition, energy flow, and nutrient cycling. To understand the ethos of an ecosystem, let us take a small pond as an example. This is a fairly self-sustainable unit and rather simple example that explain even the complex interactions that exist in an aquatic ecosystem. A pond is a shallow water body in which all the above mentioned four basic components of an ecosystem are well exhibited. The abiotic component is the water with all the dissolved inorganic and organic substances and the rich soil deposit at the bottom of the pond. The solar input, the cycle of temperature, day length, and other climatic conditions regulate the rate of function of the entire pond. The autotrophic components include the phytoplankton, some algae, and the floating, submerged, and marginal plants found at the edges. The consumers are represented by zooplankton, the free-swimming and bottom-dwelling forms. The decomposers are the fungi, bacteria, and flagellates, especially abundant in the bottom of the pool. This system performs all the functions of any ecosystem and of the biosphere as a whole, that is, conversion of inorganic to organic material with the help of radiant energy of the sun by autotrophs, consumption of the autotrophs by heterotrophs, decomposition and mineralization of the dead matter to release them back for reuse by the autotrophs. These events are repeated over and over again. There is a unidirectional movement of energy towards the higher trophic levels and its dissipation and loss as heat to the environment. Productivity. A constant input of the solar energy is a basic requirement for any ecosystem to function and sustain. Primary production is defined as the amount of biomass or organic matter produced per unit area over a time period by plants during photosynthesis. It is expressed in the terms of weight, gram per meter square, or energy, kilocalories per meter square. The rate of biomass production is called productivity. It is expressed in the terms of gram per meter square per year or calorie per meter per year. To compare the productivity of different ecosystems, it can be divided into gross primary productivity GPP and net primary productivity NPP. Gross primary productivity of an ecosystem is the rate of production of organic matter during photosynthesis. A considerable amount of GPP is utilized by the plants in respiration. Gross productivity minus respiration losses R is the net primary productivity. NPP. GPP minus R is equal to NPP. Net primary productivity is the available biomass for the consumption to heterotrophs, herbivores and decomposers. Secondary productivity is defined as the rate of formation of new organic matter by consumers. Primary productivity also depends on the plant species inhabiting a particular area. It also depends on a variety of environmental factors, availability of nutrients, and photosynthetic capacity of plants. Therefore, it varies in different types of ecosystems. The annual net primary productivity of the whole biosphere is approximately 170 billion tons, derived of organic matter. Of this, despite occupying about 70% of the surface, the productivity of the oceans are only 55 billion tons. The rest, of course, is on land. Discuss the main reason for the low productivity of ocean with your teacher. Decomposition. You may have heard of the earthworm being referred to as farmer's friend. This is so because they help in the breakdown of complex organic matter as well as in the loosening of soil. Similarly, decomposers break down complex organic matter into inorganic substances like carbon dioxide, water, and nutrients, and the process is called decomposition. Dead plant remains such as leaves, bark, and flowers, dead remains of animals, including fecal matter, constitute detritus, which is raw material for decomposition. The important steps in the process of decomposition are fragmentation, leaching, catabolism, humification, and mineralization. Detritivores, for example, earthworms, break down detritus into small particles. This process is called fragmentation. By the process of leaching, water-soluble inorganic nutrients go down into the soil horizon and get precipitated as unavailable salts. Bacterial and fungal enzymes degrade detritus into simpler inorganic substances. This process is called catabolism. It is important to note that all the above steps in decomposition operate simultaneously on the detritus. Humification and mineralization occur during the decomposition in soil. Humification leads to accumulation of dark-colored amorphous substance called humus that is highly resistant to microbial action and undergoes decomposition at an extremely slow rate. Being colloidal in nature, it serves as a reservoir of nutrients. The humus is further degraded by some microbes and release of inorganic nutrients occur by the process known as mineralization. Representation of decomposition cycle in a terrestrial ecosystem. A tree grows in the soil, then a green leaf falls down to the ground. Some are eaten by the insects and other animals. Nutrients and energy enter food web. Some nutrients leach into the soil by chemical reaction, whereas leaves are partially consumed by decomposers such as fungi and bacteria begin to lose form and become fit litter. And then they go to the organic rich soil. Further decomposition by earthworms, bacteria, soils, mites and fungi, and later on the soil, the trees grows. So this is the cycle, decomposition cycle in a terrestrial ecosystem. Decomposition is largely an oxygen requiring process. The rate of decomposition is controlled by chemical composition of detritus and climatic factors. In a particular climatic condition, decomposition rate is slower if detritus is rich in lignin and chitin, and quicker if detritus is rich in nitrogen and water-soluble substances like sugar. Temperature and soil moisture are the important climatic factors that regulate decomposition through their effects on the activities of soil microbes. Warm and moisture environment favor decomposition, whereas low temperature and anaerobiosis inhibit decomposition, resulting in buildup of organic materials. Energy flow. Except for the deep sea hydrothermal ecosystem, sun is the only source of energy for all ecosystems on Earth. Of the incident solar radiation, less than 50% of its photosynthetically active radiation PAR, we know that plants and photosynthetic bacteria autotrophs fix sun's radiant energy to make food from simple inorganic materials. Plants capture only 2 to 10% of the PAR, and this small amount of energy sustains the entire living world. So it is very important to know that how solar energy captured by the plants flows through different organisms So it is very important to know how the solar energy captured by the plants flows through different organisms of an ecosystem. All organisms are dependent for the food on producers, either directly or indirectly. So you find unidirectional flow of energy from the sun to producers and then to consumers. Is this in keeping with the first law of thermodynamics? Further, ecosystems are not exempt from second law of thermodynamics. They need constant supply of energy to synthesize the molecules they require to counteract the universal tendency towards increasing disorderliness. The green plant in the ecosystem are called producers. In a terrestrial ecosystem, major producers are herbaceous and woody plants. Likewise, producers in an aquatic ecosystem are various species like phytoplankton, algae, and higher plants. You have read about the food chain and webs that exist in nature. Starting from plants or producers, food chains or rather webs are formed in such that manner that an animal feeds on a plant or an other animal and in turn is food for another. The chain or web is formed because of this interdependency. No energy that is trapped into an organism remains in it forever. The energy trapped by the producer hence is either passed on to a consumer or the organism dies. Death of an organism is the beginning of the detritus food chain or web. All the animals depend on plants directly or indirectly for their food needs. They are hence called consumers and also heterotrophs. If they feed on the producers, the plants, they are called primary consumers. And if the other animals, which in turn eat the plants or the producer, they are called animal secondary consumers. Likewise, you could have tertiary consumers too. Obviously, the primary consumers will be herbivores. Some common herbivores are insects, birds, mammals, and in terrestrial ecosystem, and mollusks in aquatic ecosystem. The consumers that feed on these herbivores are carnivores, or more correctly, primary carnivores, though secondary consumers. Those animals that depend on the primary carnivores for food are labeled secondary carnivores. A simple grazing food chain GFC is depicted below. Grass to goat to man, producer to primary producer to secondary consumer. The detritus food chains DFC begins with the dead organic matter. It is made of decomposers, which are heterotrophic organisms, mainly fungi and bacteria. They meet their energy and nutrient requirements by degrading dead organic matter or detritus. These are also known as saprotopes. Sappho to decompose. Decomposers secrete digestive enzymes that break down dead and waste materials into simple inorganic materials, which are subsequently absorbed by them. In an aquatic ecosystem, GFC is the major conduct for energy flow. As against this, in a terrestrial ecosystem, a much larger fraction of energy flows through the detritus food chain than through GFC. Detritus food chain may be connected with the GFC at some levels. Some of the organisms of DFC are prey to GFC animals, and in a natural ecosystem, some animals like cockroaches, crow, etc. are omnivorous. These natural interconnection of food chains make it a food web. How would you classify human beings? Organisms occupy a place in a natural surroundings or in a community according to their feeding relationship with other organisms. Based on the source of their nutrition or food, organisms occupy a specific place in the food chain that is known as trophic level. Producers belong to the first trophic level, herbivores primary consumer to the second, and carnivores secondary consumer to the third. Producer first trophic level, phytoplankton, grass, tree to primary consumer second trophic level, herbivore, zooplankton, grasshopper, and cow. Secondary consumer third trophic level, carnivore, birds, fishes, and wolf. Tertiary consumer fourth trophic level, top carnivore, man, lion. The important point is to know that the amount of energy decreases at successive trophic levels. When any organism dies, it is converted to detritus or dead biomass that serves as an energy source for decomposers. Organisms at each trophic level depend on those at lower trophic levels for their energy demands. Each trophic level has a certain mass of living material at a particular time called as the standing crop. The standing crop is measured as a mass of living organism, biomass, or a number in a unit area. The biomass of a species is expressed in the terms of fresh or dry weight. Measurement of biomass in terms of dry weight is more accurate. Why? The number of trophic levels in the grazing food chain is restricted as the transfer flow of energy follows 10% law. Only 10% of the energy is transferred to each trophic level from the lower trophic level. In nature, it is possible to have so many levels, producer, herbivores, primary carnivore, secondary carnivore in the grazing food chain. Do you think there is any such limitation in a detritus food chain? Ecological pyramids. You must be familiar with the shape of a pyramid. The base of a pyramid is broad and it narrows towards the apex. Once it gets a similar shape, whether you express the food or energy relationship between organisms, At different trophic level, this relationship is expressed in terms of number, biomass, or energy. The base of each pyramid represents the producer or the first trophic level, while the apex represents the tertiary or top level consumer. The three types of ecological pyramids that are usually studied are pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass, and pyramid of energy. Pyramid of numbers in a grassland ecosystem. Only three top carnivores are supported in an ecosystem based on the production of nearly 6 million plants. Pyramid of biomass shows a sharp decrease in biomass at higher trophic levels. Inverted pyramid of biomass, small standing crop of phytoplankton supports a large standing crop of zooplankton. An ideal pyramid of energy. Observe that primary producers convert only 1% of the energy in the sunlight available to them into NPP. Any calculations of energy content, biomass or number has to include all organisms at that trophic level. No generalizations we make will be true if we take only few individuals at any trophic level into account. Also, a given organism may occupy more than one trophic level simultaneously. One must remember that the trophic level represents a functional level, not a species as such. A given species may occupy more than one trophic level in the same ecosystem at the same time. For example, a sparrow is a primary consumer when it eats seeds, fruits, peas, and a secondary consumer when it eats insects and worms. Can you work out how many trophic levels human beings function at in a food chain? In most ecosystems, all the pyramids of number of energy and biomass are upright. That is, producers are more in number and biomass than herbivores. And herbivores are more in number and biomass than carnivores. Also, the energy at a lower trophic level is always more than at a higher level. There are exceptions to this generalization. If you were to count the numbers of insects feeding on a big tree, what kind of pyramid would you get? Now, add an estimate of number of small birds depending on the insects, as also the number of larger birds eating the small. Draw the shape you would get. The pyramid of biomass in sea is generally inverted because the biomass of fishes far exceeds that of phytoplankton. Isn't that a paradox? How would you explain this? Pyramid of energy is always upright, can never be inverted, because when energy flows from a particular trophic level to the next trophic level, some energy is always lost as heat in each step. Each bar in energy pyramid indicates the amount of energy present at each trophic level in a given time or annually per unit area. However, there are certain limitations of ecological pyramids, such as it does not take into account the same species belonging to two or more trophic levels. It assumes a simple food chain, something that almost never exists in nature. It does not accommodate a food web. Moreover, saprophytes are not given any place in ecological pyramids, even though they play a vital role in ecosystem. So, summary of the chapter. An ecosystem is a structural and functional unit of nature, and it comprises of abiotic and biotic components. Abiotic components are inorganic materials, air, water, and soil, whereas biotic components are producers, consumers, and decomposers. Each ecosystem has a characteristic physical structure resulting from interaction the amongst the abiotic and biotic components. Species composition and stratification are the two main structural features of an ecosystem. Based on the source of nutrition, if every organism occupies a place in the ecosystem. Productivity, decomposition, energy flow, and nutrient cycling are four important components of an ecosystem. Primary productivity is the rate of capture of solar energy or biomass production of the producers. It is divided into two types: gross primary product GPP and net primary product NPP. Rate of capture of solar energy or total production of organic matter is called GPP. NPP is the remaining biomass or energy left after utilization of producers. Secondary productivity is the rate of assimilation of food energy by consumers. In decomposition, complex organic compounds of detritus are converted to carbon dioxide, water, and inorganic nutrients by decomposers. Decomposition involves three processes, namely fragmentation of detritus, leaching, and catabolism. Energy flow is unidirectional. First, plants capture solar energy, and then food is transferred from the producer to decomposers. Organisms of different trophic levels in nature are connected to each other for food or energy relationship, forming a food chain. The storage and movement of nutrient elements through various components of the ecosystem is called nutrient cycling. Nutrients are repeatedly used through this process. Nutrient cycling is of two types: gaseous and sedimentary. Atmosphere or hydrosphere is the reservoir for the gaseous type of cycle carbon, whereas Earth's crust is a reservoir for sedimentary type phosphorus. Products of ecosystem process are named as ecosystem services, for example, purification of air and water by forests. And with this, we come to the end of the chapter ecosystem. Thank you for listening to this reading podcast on Study Savvy. Keep learning. Bye.